you ever have any encounters with Beilein, or maybe you like stepped out of line with a question or what have you with that?
No, for a while, Beilein was just wondering who the hell I was and how I would like find stuff out. Cause like that was before I think like social media was real big, and
Yeah.
I would find out different things about recruiting or whatever else. And that was where he was always worried, like this game, like what's going on? Like, how do people know this? And so all that was like the early way. And then I don't think we never really had a problem. Like, I feel like it's not like I was just like ripping people or like
No.
criticizing people in any way. So I didn't really have any issues with that. Try to just figure like if it's an honest opinion, I don't think it's not like anyone was ever like irate that I said something bad about their kid or whatever else, but I don't know.
I mean, some of the message boards, they're pretty clean, but did Beilein he never like contact you directly and be like, what the hell, Dylan? Like, how did you know this?
Yeah, that happened so like this was like early when I started the site, like before I had a credential or anything, or would like actually go to games. And he basically tried to hunt me down, and like no one really knew who I was, and set up this whole thing. And basically he just wanted to not have misinformation about their recruiting. He was very worried about it. And that was really what got him the most involved at the time. But then he would comment on other things here and there, but nothing too crazy. I don't think there was ever anything like take this down or anything like that.
Yeah, nothing to it. But did that make you tighten up when he contacted you? You're like, okay, now I gotta make sure this is all correct.
Yeah, I mean, and it wasn't even like a big thing. He was
No,
just he was very worried about it, like someone that said it had an offer or something else, and it was a whole thing. That would have been probably way back. And if there's not like even recruiting coverage, there wasn't like all this sort of edits and everything else. People out there is much more limited. So I think that's all I can really remember as far as that goes.
Like we said, you started like 08, 09. So you've been covering the whole rise of the Michigan program and towards the end. And I'm curious if you have a perspective on the difference between Juwan and Beilein, and whether it's, handling media or just in general.
Yeah, it's funny because like Beilein when you were there and Beilein by the end of his time, I think was very different with how he handled the media. It's just sort of maybe realizing there's sort of just more that he had to do, and looked at it more as a tool or an asset, or like just like he played the game more, I think, just in terms of like when you get to a Final Four, like all the media is just everything's different. And I think from that point it sort of shifted his approach, because before I'd say he was very like he wouldn't really say anything and was basically just very by the book, keep it closed, done, like you have to do media, do it and move on, and pretty like paranoid almost to an extent. Later, I'm sure he still had some of that, but I don't feel like it was as notable. Juwan, I feel like Beilein would also share a lot more in his post-game press conference about sort of the intricacies of the game, like the X's and O's of what happened, a little bit of his strategy. Juwan's usually pretty much along the lines of, I'm not going to tell you because they'll watch the press conference and they'll use it against me, right? So that's kind of what he answers to any specific question about what happens. So that's a little, like Matt Painter's really good talking about the game, I think, in his press conferences. Juwan probably would be if he knew it wasn't going to be listened to by everyone else, but he kind of keeps that to himself. So I wouldn't say Juwan's particularly excited to log on to media Zoom calls to talk about the team, but it is what it is, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine he'll just get more and more comfortable as the years go on with that. I mean, I can only imagine like how much pressure he feels. Like he's been getting all these awards, but at the same time, that comes with a lot of pressure. And now they're like a #1 seed and they're losing livers. So I can understand why he would tighten up a little bit. But to your point with Beilein, I always laugh because I was watching the 2013 Final Four from Spain and just being like, who is this guy? Why is he so relaxed on the sideline? And I'm like, oh yeah, look who's on the court, all like NBA guys. And I'm like, okay, now it makes sense. Like once you build that program up, you get that success, you can start to relax and just trust things. So I think maybe Juwan is not quite in that position to fully trust, which I understand is only second year and you got a lot of pressure on your back.
Yeah, I also think there's sort of a dynamic where coaches who have been in college for a long time, like really buy into like it's almost like they're salesmen when they're in their press conferences and they're kind of creating this image or brand of themselves. And like, to be honest, Juwan doesn't even need to, right? So he doesn't need that his brand speaks for itself to begin with. Whereas a lot of guys, especially like career coaches who kind of come up, they're like, I'm going to use this to paint myself as X, Y, and Z. And it's just a different whole shtick to how they embrace some of those situations. And I think that is just, I think Juwan's far too comfortable in his skin to have to worry about doing any of that to sell himself.
For sure. And I love, he gets very comfortable on the court. I mean, you saw the argument early in the year with Livers. That was really nothing to them. It is nothing. The blow up with Turgeon, he lets his passion come out. So it is there. So it's funny to hear him like answer questions. You're like, all right, just give it time. But like he did
when he got asked after the first Michigan State game, basically someone asked him if they would still take the second game seriously or something like that. It's along those lines, right? And he started with shit, and then he's like, oh, I almost got out of character for a second, and then he came back and said it's very important. So he clearly has this he clearly is putting on a front of just how he wants to present himself to the media. It's something he does. It's just like 15 minutes of his day. It's not really who Juwan Howard is, I would say.
No, and I think it's a very college thing. It's also a very Michigan thing where there's like, Michigan man acts this way and is nice and polite and, doesn't speak out of line and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, it's that whole Michigan man thing is great. And it's great for the culture, but it's dying out. It's just a dying sort of cultural thing because you got to let these kids come in and be themselves, basically.
Yeah. And I would say Beilein probably pushed that pretty hard as far as how you present yourself in the media and everything else. I'm sure that still is a thing. It's just, I do think that as things shift, right, players are going to have more incentive to build their own brands and maybe not just be Michigan player number one's brand and be their own selves. And I think that will be interesting how that changes from a media perspective, where maybe players deserve to have a little bit more of how they want to portray themselves.
Yeah, it's interesting, especially with Howard coming from the NBA, and guys do that, tenfold compared to college. So Howard's recruiting class, the McDonald's All-Americans, I'm interested to see how he handles that. He lets those guys be themselves and have their brand while also, you're still teaching an 18-year-old, 19-year-old kid what the hell to do on the court because they really don't understand it. So it is a different balance for college. Like it is easy to say, yeah, let them be themselves, but it's also like these are 18, 19-year-old kids that really don't know shit. So it's not the easiest job in the world.
Yeah, and you have to be yourself, but it's be in a position to be coached into presenting yourself how you want to present yourself, not just how someone else thinks you should present yourself. That's kind of how I would say it, right? Like,
yeah,
I think Isaiah Livers has really done a good job this year speaking his mind when the time is right, and in a way that maybe you wouldn't have seen someone do in media availabilities 10 years ago at Michigan. So I think like there's stuff like that where, I don't know, just things you notice. It's also just weird that every press conference for the last year has been over Zoom, right? It's very different to see someone like hunched over a computer and talking about whatever happened in the game than in the heat of the moment sitting in front of you. So it's just a different environment all around.
I asked Brendan Quinn something on this same subject, but how have you felt not being able to get close to the players and have that sort of face-to-face contact where that trust can be broken over a Zoom call when you're asking a question?
Yeah, the Zoom calls are not particularly useful, I would say. They are, it's the whole world is dealing with it. So it's not like it's unique to college basketball, but I'd say it's different being like, from part of me, like I do a lot like analyzing the game and watching it live and writing a recap. It's way easier to do that on TV, especially with where we sit at Chrysler, right? Like being at a game is a lot harder from that perspective. As far as the media access, it's definitely different. I think the postseason is probably the most dramatic shift, right? Like, because you're going from open locker room and like really being able to talk to multiple people and read the room to like in the regular season, you're still just getting the same number of players kind of put out in a room. It's a little different. Whereas in the postseason, you really see, I think you get a better sense for the mood of a team, that kind of where everything's going in a way that you just won't get. Now we get one player over Zoom. It's just very different. So I think it'll be very noticeable in the postseason, just how much less access all around there is.
Yeah, that's a good point, because it is a lot more hyped up and people pay way more attention nationally. I'm curious of who on this team, I don't want to use the word favorite, I guess maybe most introspective, or, really takes their time with answers and not giving you, the corporate lines. Who's been someone that you really enjoyed interviewing? I guess let's say the last 2 years, because Zoom's been tough. So it's like a couple of the last 2 years even.
Yeah, I think Isaiah has been the most sort of thoughtful quote on the team for the last 2 years. Hunter Dickens is probably the most tweet-worthy quote. He knows how to come up with the one-liners and stuff like that, and he's obviously a very confident guy. But Isaiah, I would say, is probably the most kind of thoughtful and will actually like speak his mind on things.
Franz seems like the type of guy who's just gonna keep reserved, like a Juwan type guy, who's like, all right, there's myself outside of here, and then this is who I'm going to portray here.
Yeah, it's funny because Mo is not that.
Yeah,
right? So it's funny to see. I think you'll see this. Franz will kind of stick to his script. He'll say what he's going to say, but he kind of has a dry sense of humor where he'll say something and he'll kind of laugh when it's just like he's like, what are we doing here? Point something out that like someone asked him, like, how does it feel to not be scoring as many points or something like that? And he'll be like, well, we're winning or whatever else. Like, it's not really what I'm worried about. And just a very dry, matter-of-fact way that works for him, I think. But it's just funny to see the difference between him and Mo with how they handle that stuff.
Yeah, is Mo in your top 5 interviewees?
He has to be up there, I would say, for sure.
I'm trying to think of other guys that like he's a very unique character for any program, but I think for Michigan for sure. Stauskas, maybe?
Stauskas was good. Yeah, Stauskas had to call himself the best 3-point shooter in the country like 5 games into his freshman year. That was always a good one.
That takes some balls, that is for sure. Yeah, I would say those two. We tried, but we got buttoned up pretty well and didn't have quite the confidence of a Mo or a Stauskas, so it's not easy.
Yeah, you were more weren't just going to come in flying from the hip and your first media availability calling yourself the best shooter in the country, huh?
No, definitely not. I know one time that I pissed off Northwestern fans, all 100 of them. I said that the arena was quiet and basically just all Michigan fans anyways. And I get to the game and like, I am villain number 1. And I'm like, the hell did I just do? Like, I do the exact opposite, try and make sure the exact opposite happens. So even then, like, you could say anything and piss somebody off. Yeah. I want to talk about.
Go ahead.
No, I don't want to cut you off.
I was going to say that you can say anything and piss them off. That's why you got a podcast now.
Exactly. Even then, now I'm like still trying to like not be too crazy. I'm like about to say something or like write something down for a question. I'm like, I don't want to piss some former player off or like get too into the weeds about some story. So I don't know. I still try and walk that corporate line. I think Beilein has ingrained that in me forever.